Hello, my queers and kumquats. I hope you're feeling comfy. It's Vera Bradley, the Bomber Girl, here to tell you about my favorite game of 2024. Caravan SandWitch was made for me. I knew that from the name and by seeing the art when it hit my Steam front page, which is a feeling I last got from when I happened upon Crosscode on release day and discovered an immediate favorite in that game. There's a lot of thematic similarities between these, so if you like that one, this might be a recommendation for you. Caravan SandWitch is a game about navigation, not only through the environment, but also through the emotional landscape of the people that exist in your world. It is a surprisingly hard science fiction story, which of course means that it just tells the story of the present through the thinly veiled metaphor of the future, which in this case is maybe most comparable to something like Cowboy Bebop's really gutted out post-late stage capitalist apocalypse in space. But it also has that usually Japanese feeling of mono no aware, best captured by the anime Yokohama Shopping Log, where cute lesbian robots sit around and do nothing on the backdrop of humanity peacefully going extinct. I got those vibes when I started up the game, but just seeing the protagonist for the first time, I thought immediately, not only did they seem intentionally androgynous, but in more of a complete and subtle fashion than I think like a cis person could really even process. Soj, the main character, I wasn't ready to assume even used she, her pronouns until much later into the game when someone finally referred to her by that way. I was curious if she might be a trans woman. At first I thought she could be a trans man, maybe just a woman who isn't especially feminine, a man who isn't especially masculine, which really what I'm trying to describe as a person who doesn't fit into gender stereotypes enough that you can immediately tell what gender that person is, which is something I really look for in a game protagonist. Soj doesn't look like somebody who's trying to performatively be in a masculine or feminine role in particular. She looks like somebody who's ready to climb around. And I love to climb me around in some video games. What I got from the character designs in this game is a feeling that they were trying to remove the concern of gender in how it plays into interaction. They really wanted you not to think of as many characters as possible as a man or a woman and to project your expectations of those gender roles onto these characters, especially considering that this game is set far in the future where those roles would be considerably different and, in this case, essentially dissolved. The one cis couple that's in the game has a baby whom they always refer to with they, them pronouns, as the baby hasn't chosen a gender identity yet. They are an infant. There are plenty of characters referred to with non-binary pronouns, characters who are suggested to be trans through environmental detail. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just say you find a blage in the one girl's house, a progress flag on the door. Look, there's certain things that if you're trans, you see it and you go, yeah, okay, I get it. I see what's happening here. That's why Yucca became the avatar for the channel. She runs the garden. She's very sweet. Soj, the player character, she does identify as a woman, but I don't think there's anything about her that would be difficult to relate to for somebody who doesn't put their gender at the forefront of their social performance. And if you don't know what I mean by that, meet me in the comments after class. But even beyond seeing the main character, seeing that there's a van in the game, seeing that it's called Sandwich and wanting to know what the hell is a sandwich, what really drew me to this game is that it doesn't have any combat whatsoever. It's a game about driving around a small open world and stopping to platform and gather collectibles in the effort of helping your friends to re-establish connections between their community, either with the growingly disparate and untamed interspatial sort of mainland that exists from the evil consortium ruling all space, or by connecting them more deeply with the planet that they currently reside on. Actually, the way that this game presents being on this sort of island nation so far away that even mail has a difficult time getting to you, it kind of reminds me of this manga called Wandering Island, which is about this girl who flies around in a biplane and delivers mail to some of the most obscure islands in the Japanese archipelago. Do recommend, though it publishes very slowly. Maybe I keep thinking about manga because that medium has always had a foothold in this game's native country of France. As much as this game could be compared to anime-inspired French animation like Code Lyoko, the design sense really reminds me of classic androgynous sci-fi like They Were 11 or even more modern Land of the Lustrous. Even though in that usually French way, the characters look a bit more down to earth. Just as well, Japanese artists of the 80s were tremendously influenced by French illustrator Moebius, whose hyper-sparse desert colorations also crept into my mind during the early hours of the game. And I'm sure there are many more influences I'm failing to mention, including all of the really obvious gaming stuff like Zelda the Wind Waker, which is a clear visual and gameplay influence, the Minish Cap, or Mass Effect 1 with its Mako driving sections. But it's the stuff that actually makes this game feel not quite like any other game that really draws me towards it. Now, I do think it's important to list some of the very evident gameplay influences like Halo, or especially A Short Hike, and Sable, which I've seen this game compared to a lot and I need to get around to playing. And I find that important because of how this game sits kind of in between the very small indie design sense and the bigger AAA design sense in something that I would call, like, I don't know, single A territory? What I mean by this is that Halo and other games that really innovated this kind of open map design and these driving mechanics, those games did so in service of creating satisfying moments that felt unique from the main combat loop that is the core of the game, just so that they could break up the pacing. Even if the driving experience in this game feels kind of like Halo, taking out all of the combat and focusing just on how you navigate the environment and then fleshing out that environment so that it's really satisfying to just spend time in without fighting, is the brilliance of this game. Like A Short Hike, it also boils down the broad strokes of adventure and discovery games like Breath of the Wild into a smaller art piece about overcoming just a small period of anxiety. Caravan SandWitch is a small studio game that can't be compared to the modern boundary-pushing software that's out there, but what it has to offer would take the same amount of effort to realize as something which would have passed for the mainstream 20 years ago, just with an HD art style. Whereas A Short Hike was just about a single day's anxiety, Caravan SandWitch concerns itself with the looming anxieties of an entire era, with commentary on how the broad strokes of the human gestalt send reverberations into all corners of the human experience. It's an intergenerational story with a ton of lore and background. In A Short Hike, your mom is probably going to be fine. In Caravan SandWitch, your sister has been missing for years, and civilization has clearly been in decline for decades, if not centuries. In this game, your object is to salvage hope from the scraps that have been left over by the overzealous regimes of yesterday. You have to find the useful things that weren't already expended by a tremendously wasteful entity which has eaten its own tail and is bleeding out slowly in space. As a piece of art, I think there is a very careful yin-yang structure to this game. In the first half, it strikes you mostly how the atmosphere is so pleasant and nostalgic. But there's this huge dark spot looming in the distance, and the reverberations of that darkness are felt everywhere. By the game's midpoint, when we have a real understanding of how this bright facade of this world is only barely upheld, while the people living here struggle under the weight of the past and how the stage of things have developed, as we start to learn what problems face this planet and also what can be done to bring hope to this situation, the intonation of that circle inside of the game world's crescent shape shifts from yin to yang, the depth of darkness from the past better understood, but the light of hope also more brightly visible in the distance. Yeah, I have to be really metaphorical to avoid spoilers, I'm sorry. In terms of its statement, the story of this game is about colonization and small-town living after the apocalyptic final stage of capitalism. The reason that there are humans on this planet Sigalo is because this intergalactic mega consortium showed up to this planet to mine all of its resources, and they were stopped just short of finishing the planet off completely by the intervention of mysterious entities known as the Sandwiches, which scared the consortium off of the planet by damaging their technology beyond usability. Hence, there are ruins all over the planet of what were once the consortium's factories. After the generation of this giant Tarrasque storm that's been ruining all the technology on the planet, most of humanity simply left, and the remainder have grown up surrounded by all of the remnants of that old mining endeavor, and just kind of take it for granted, so much that they barely understand what a lot of it even does or what it was ever used for. Those who do love the planet as a home find that its livability is waning by the day, and so the call to move to one of the planet-sized space cities feels inevitable. But Soj is the rare returnee after 6 years from one of those space cities, and she realizes through nostalgia over the course of the game how much she had forgotten enjoying the slower, quieter pace of provincial living over the constant movement and cramped stress of life in the big city. The metaphors are spoken so clearly that the science fiction aspects are really more like aesthetic set dressing on a very typical story about life in a dwindling industrial town. A story told in real life, basically anywhere in the USA that isn't metropolitan. And I imagine in lots of France, since that's what the game is actually based on. In particular, the mountainous desert mining aesthetic reminds me of Elko, Nevada, which is a place that exists just for the sake of a gold mine. So young people who don't want to work in those mines, they inevitably end up moving to Reno or Las Vegas, which are like 4 and 6 hours away respectively, but those are the nearest civilization. Elko is otherwise. It's just a town that exists because there is a mine there. Probably won't when the mine is done. The desert in this game also metaphorically emphasizes how the civilization that's here is cut off from the rest of the consortium. While the mountains and desert define the parameters of the game's map, contextually the desert is not meant to be literally impassable. It's more like it's just not worth it for you in the context of the game. Likewise, the consortium has cut its funding to this planet, so much so that they even uploaded a virus to the universal social network called Toast, which fried all of the AIs of the sweet little adorable robots that were left behind on the planet, assumably trying to clear their tracks on the way out. Now, the residents who live here are still at least allowed to travel to cities for supplies, but their planet is so remote that the journey takes days, and the village can't really afford to spare intelligent and able-bodied folk, such as your engineer buddy, who builds upgrades onto your van over the course of the game, and is obviously sorely needed to behave as the village chief rather than having to take trips all of the time. Soj is obviously needed here as well, and her arc over the game is surprisingly choice-driven, and can even lead to multiple endings, which has a lot to do with whether you play her as someone whose values are changing to regard sustainability in the village over life back in the city, or if you regard her as somebody who encourages other people to join her in moving on and fitting in with the system better. Dialogue choices aside, just the openness of the game's world gives it kind of like a simple Rorschach test quality, in that your personality and proclivities will play heavily into how you approach this fairly small and self-contained adventure. You can just stay focused on the tasks provided by the in-game characters and take a pretty linear path through the game's story. Or you can do like I did and immediately drive around the entire perimeter of the map to find its boundaries and then slowly work your way inward. In a certain sense, the game has that Zeldian quality we often call Metroidvanian, where you come upon obstacles that are obviously going to be clearable with equipment that you're going to acquire later, but most of the time that you encounter them in this game, it's because you've run ahead of the missions that are at hand and you're scouting out the world. If you prefer to always arrive at the task that you are prepared for, or if you prefer to identify all of the tasks available and then work your way back to accomplishing them as you find the means to do so, this game will accommodate either approach. And of course, there is plenty of space in the game to just play around with random ramps that let you jump your van, or the lack of fall damage, which really lets you go crazy running around, and an abundance of quiet places to just sit and drink in the atmosphere a while. This video would get entirely too long if I tried to break down every single subtle way that this game guides the player's eyes around the environment, and how much excruciating revision must have been necessary to craft an environment that consistently provides epic vistas, intricately hidden secrets and collectibles, and a world just so tightly interconnected that it really does feel as quick to navigate as the back of your mouse and keyboard hands by the end of it. Assuming you play this on Steam like I did, although it's soon to be available even in physical form on Nintendo Switch and PS5. As much time as I spent circling back to the same locations throughout the game, not just to scour them for parts or even to talk to the quest-giving characters whom I grew to love, it was also just to bask in the beauty of it all until I baked it into my brain, so I can go back here mentally when the real-world capitalist struggle starts to feel like too much. Aiding my immersion into this game's mood is the awesome soundtrack from Antimony, which I've probably been playing in the background the whole video. I describe the core of the soundtrack as minimal folk, but with such robust soundcraft and such heavy digital effects that it creates like the laid-back sci-fi version of emotive beach pop or like desert post-rock or jazzy electronica. I don't know how to describe it. Certainly sandwich music. I know I'm going to be hearing the iconic title screen track that I spent a lot of time listening to, as well as the main village theme, which has these soft guitars that are very pretty, but then these unnerving kind of low undercurrent strings looming in the background, and even some of the more esoteric exploration jingles in my sleep. I do kind of wish that the mini radios, which are findable in the game that play unique songs, did so over a larger distance of the game world. But if you just chill with them for a while, you'll hear some of the most eclectic and exciting tunes in the game. Or you can just boot up the soundtrack on Spotify or YouTube, or buy it bundled with the game on Steam, of course. Since we're on the subject of complaints, I only have a few, and only one that's really worth mentioning, which is that the caravan can become stuck a little too easily. I don't mind this too much because the game does let you teleport to the garage when it detects that you're stuck, and it's never hard to get back to somewhere, but a couple of times I just got stuck in really goofy ways that could probably be cleaned up. Granted, it's unbelievable how much freedom of mobility this game actually grants you in exchange for this one concession that you might sometimes get caught on stuff. You cannot flip the van. It handles very well, even sped up, and lets you really tear your way around once you know the environment, which rules. However, if you get stuck in a way that the game doesn't recognize as impossible to escape, you can end up with the very annoying experience of trying to back and forth your way out of a couple of inches of space. It didn't happen to me a ton of times, and it was usually a result of my own recklessness, but it certainly created the most frustration of any part of the game. Everything that is really great about this game is also great about other games, but Caravan SandWitch is as defined by what it doesn't have compared to those games as by what it does. It's innovative not for breaking new ground, but for boiling all the bloat water out of its genre to give you a more concentrated flavor. If combat is more core to your enjoyment of adventure games than traversal is, then this game will mean nothing to you at all. But if you're like me and you think you would have enjoyed Breath of the Wild maybe even more without having to fight/avoid all the moblins, this game is perfect for you, just like it was for me. I don't want to spoil any of the game's most precious moments or its most interesting twists, but I do want to talk about some of the themes that arise through the course of the story. So consider this as your spoiler breakpoint. If you want to play this game and you want there to be plenty of surprise left for you, I've already shown some stuff, but I've been trying to keep it very early game. I'll show some stuff a little later. I'm going to really be avoidant of anything I consider a big spoiler, but again, this is your signal to just go play the game if you think you're going to like it. It's literally 6 to 12 hours. I think it was 12 and a half for me, and I recorded my whole playthrough, which you can also watch. It's unlisted. It's in a playlist. I'll put a link in the description. I voiced all of the dialogue in the game in my playthrough. I gave a lot of commentary, a lot more than what I'm going to even have in this video. If this video does really well and this game starts catching on, maybe eventually I'll circle back to it and do like a real deep dive, because there is a ton to be said about this game. But again, this is more of a recommendation I'm not trying to get too spoilery. Okay, so again, I'm not going to spoil the ending or anything past this point. Like, I'm still going to leave a lot of surprises. I know some of y'all are really, really particular about spoilers, so this is your warning. Okay, let's get into it. I said already that this is a game about navigation, but it's also a game about networking. Actually, it's about a ton of things because it has so many robust characters, and I can't believe other reviewers have talked them down, except maybe they didn't bother finishing all the side quests, which let you get to know the characters and their story. Who knows? Depending on the choices that you make during certain interactions, some of the ending credit scenes will end up being different, and I haven't even fully explored all of the variables that change them, but a couple of them have some substantial thematic importance, and I will spoil one just because the journey is more interesting than the destination in this case. So the game's player character Soj, she left her hometown when most of the people her age had already left, and she only returns because of this distress beacon that she received from her long missing older sister, which convinces her that her sister Garanche may still be alive. Soj teams up with Garanche's lover Nefle to uncover the mystery of what happens, which is the plot around which all of the central twists and the excitement of the game revolve. There's a choice you get to make in the final moments of the game that's going to give you one or the other ending, and I don't want to spoil either of those, so instead I'm going to give you a smaller spoiler about a side quest ending that I think kind of metaphorically expresses the game's central conflict about whether living in a convenient and avoidant way is worth the trade-off of losing intimate connections and freedom of mobility. So in this game, there's this almost token-feeling straight cis family. I'm joking, but literally everyone else in the game is either gay, implicitly trans, or gender non-binary. There's only one straight cis couple in the game. And you can bring their baby, a whole bunch of stuffed animals that you find around the environment. When you see the struggle that these two parents are having, not only in taking care of themselves, but each other, their child, and the rest of the village, because both of them are in key roles here, that ends up being the force that is most seeming to inspire Soj to realize her own necessity in helping the village to operate through this tumultuous period it's going through. And when you reach the end of each of the parents' individual arcs, each of them will ask Soj her opinion about whether they should move to one of the space cities so that their kid Apricot will live a less risky life with potential for more opportunities, or if they should stay behind on this planet. It's what they know and what they like and what they're used to. Now, depending on what you tell them, the game either sends the family off at the end, or it shows them living happily in the village years down the line. But there isn't really a clear value statement on the game's part about which of these is a good or bad ending. Having said that, I think it's very clear based on the game's clearly stated ethics that we should imagine Apricot's future on the planet as the obviously happy ending, and the other one as ambivalent at best and outright depressing at worst, depending on how much you personally agree with what the game is saying. Each of the game's arcs is open-ended in this way, where there is an answer that's obviously correct based on the game's opinion, but which it's up to the gamer to really conclude for themselves that the implication of the game's world building suggests an answer to be truly positive, and another one to probably lead to darker results. There's a lot of interesting techniques employed by this game in telling its story, but one of those is just the way it doles out information about the setting, giving you enough to have a pretty clear picture of a lot of the important events in the history of this planet and its inhabitants by the end of the game, but in such a disconnected way that you really can't get it until you've learned a lot. I feel like I'd be spoiling too much if I even just took a paragraph to explain why all the facilities that you urbexed into originally existed, or how any of the important technology works, so I won't do that. And anyways, if you've ever worked a really deeply capitalist job like, bank merchandising, you will understand what this game is saying at such a core level that it feels like preaching to the choir in the key of C. So instead of focusing on the evil corporation that created all of everyone's problems in this game world, I want to focus on the couple of groups in the story who are doing things right, and who kind of inspire the human characters to advance their little post-civilization civilization. Much like in the way that Zelda has the Goron, Zora, and Kokiri races, the world of this game has these humanoid amphibians, these sentient robots, and the traveling nomads, with their own customs that are apart from the rest of the human outpost. I don't want to spoil any of the stories around these characters either, but each of their groups is used to flesh out the themes of networking through awesome science fiction concepts. The Renedo species of frog people is heavily connected to a mycelial network that runs underneath their planet. They communicate with this mycelia through music about all of their memories. And when they're inside of their eggs, the mycelia embeds all of the species' memories into their heads, which they then slowly forget over the course of their lives, which means that the young tetos are considered the intelligent innovators of the species, whom the older ones are meant to look to for inspiration while protecting them. Even though they keep telling you in the game that this is unlike humans, plenty of people have argued that humans are actually just like this. And indeed, a lot of how we operate is from genetic memory encoded into our DNA, which we get in the womb. So it could be that Soj just doesn't know about human biology enough to point out the similarities. The robots, meanwhile, have been given enough sentience to approximate human emotions, and they're released from their tasks like 40 years ago, and now they're being actively shut down by the consortium that created them, so they are seeking to collect all of their consciousnesses into a hard drive so that they can minimize their impact on the environment and make themselves harder to track down overall. I love the robots in this game. All of them have adorable personalities, and the fact that they have to learn to cope with death and accept their troubled circumstances as the products of epic colonialism forms a very clear parallel with Soj's arc. If I get too much more into the specifics about this game's themes of conservation, sustainability, minimizing environmental impact while maximizing social usefulness, and about acceptance, I'll end up spoiling too much. But the game forms a very robust stance in showing why these considerations are integral, and also shows us some creative ways to go about implementing strategies to accomplish some of these things. I love that the game doesn't have to be cynical about every single aspect of capitalism in order to show how it is evil as well. In this universe, there is obviously no longer discussion about gender or sexuality, with open expression in those facets being embraced by everyone that you encounter. The stuff that Soj is being bullied about in the capitalist hell has nothing to do with gender or sexuality and everything to do with the insider and outsider dynamics of contributing to an environment where the people that you care about live. It's about the difficulties that capitalism creates in accounting for anyone besides yourself, and the conflict between either having an endless climb up through opportunities or a quiet lifestyle of fighting to survive, but enjoying every breath you take that much more because of how much more fulfilling it is to live in service of making things better for the greater good instead of making things worse and slowly draining the universe of all life. I think you could tell I really loved this game. I love that it has an optimistic atmosphere and it has so many bright and lovable characters, but that also the story goes to some really dark and challenging places with ambivalence all threaded through its conclusions, which doesn't undercut its hopefulness, but rather leaves you with a feeling like you need to strive to the ideals professed in this story. Whether these characters actually succeeded in doing so after the story's end or didn't is really up to your imagination to decide, but you can take into your own hands the way you handle your involvement in your own community, how you navigate, how you network the world. If you take this game as a message of graceful solemnity in the knowledge that the capital void will swallow everything one day, or if you take it as a message of comfort that enough empathy between us can make things a little bit better one step at a time, either way, this is a journey that is going to speak to you emotionally and intellectually as long as you understand the world that we really live in right now, and you have a real love for the beauty in the world and in other people. As stated on the Steam page, it's a damn good travel ad for south of France, because I would love to spend some time in a place like this. As I mentioned earlier, you can watch my entire barely edited playthrough, which includes extensive commentary and reading all the dialogue out loud in inconsistent voices, I'm putting a link to the unlisted video here on screen. Be warned that I really wasn't in any kind of rush, nor was I trying to show off any of the gamer skills that I don't have, so parts of it might be frustrating, but you can always just skip all that and find your way to the bits where I really wouldn't shut up. If this game catches on, and this video does well, I would love to make a follow-up video in the future going way deeper into spoilers and into the nitty-gritty of the plot and the themes to really flesh out everything this game has to say, especially on subjects like guilt and loss, which were too hard to really get into here without spoiling the stories that talk about them or making the video too long. So if you want to see that, please tell me about it in the comments, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell to be notified when public videos like this one are released, and please share this video with anyone that you think would enjoy this phenomenal game. Thank you again to Plain Toast, the developers, for bringing this therapeutic masterwork into my life, and to anyone who watched this video all the way to the end, thank you so much. I'm Vera Bomber Girl Bradley, and I hope you queers keep it comfy. See you later.